management group, the Johnny Appleseeds of rainwater harvesting, based in Tucson. And Kendall will be talking about some more work they're doing along Tanque, Verde, and Sabino Creek.
Thanks, Tom. I want to thank Claire and Ashley for preempting my explanation of water budgets and doing a thorough job of doing that, so I can kind of get to the meat of what really excites me is using the water budget as a tool for management. And so we're a nonprofit based in Tucson, been around since 2003. We do focus a lot on water harvesting, but thinking about how do we use that as a tool for watershed management, watershed health. So we often get pegged as the rainwater harvesting folks, not the watershed folks. So I just want to correct that, we do like to focus on the watershed. And this is a really exciting program that we just launched last November, but we have been building up over the last couple of years to launch as a vehicle for engaging community. And so we heard from Bill and Ian earlier this morning that communication is key for then building relationships, building trust, and then eventually stewardship. So they're one or two, landowners, managers for large swaths of this rural landscape that we're trying to work hard to preserve, maintain, and restore some sort of balance. Now imagine moving into an urban sector or urban fringe. You're now working with thousands of landowners that you're trying to move towards becoming stewards. So that's the task that we've set ourselves upon. And we're calling it the River Run Network. And if you go to the web link in the upper right, pretty much everything I showed today is up on our website, including the water budget graphs, tables, restoration goals, even pledging support, which I know a number of you have probably already done in this room. Now, before I move on, I just want to also give thanks to everybody who has lent their expertise, data, just reviewing what we're doing to make sure that it's sound, that it makes sense before we launch it forward and into the community. So most of us know this story. We've killed our rivers, we're killing our creeks, we're mining our groundwater, we're also having to face climate change, I'll say those two words, and think about how we can become more adaptable, but somehow we need to restore balance. So we can continue to go down this path of scarcity, which has kind of been in the news a lot, or we can think about how we can reframe it and start thinking about how we can move towards a path of abundance. And so this is just a picture of what's happening in the Santa Cruz River, a picture of what's happened in Sabino Creek, but this story is similar for many of our riparian creeks and rivers. So 4 years ago, we launched our 50-year program vision. So we like to think long-term. So we're not going to get this done next year, the year after. So we set our 50-year program vision of restoring the heritage of year-round free-flowing rivers, creeks, and springs in southern Arizona. We're primarily focusing on the Tucson Basin, and we're aligning very well with Sonoran Institute, with a number of others, Nature Conservancy in the San Pedro area, but thinking about how can we make better use of available waters while putting more back into the ground to support our riparian systems. And I kind of see our riparian systems as being the canary in the coal mine. If we don't have healthy, intact riparian systems, we don't have water security. So thinking about cost benefit, thinking about reframing the issue, approaching it to engage others from a water security perspective, perhaps, or from an ecosystem services perspective, flood control. So not always for the intrinsic benefit of the system itself, even though that's my part. So we're developing the River Run Network, but really so think about a network. What's the beauty of a network? It's creating a platform for sharing, for communication, for connecting with others. And so through that, building trust, building those relationships. So what we're trying to do, and I had a great intern, Madeline Ryder, who developed kind of priority areas throughout the Tucson Basin for the Pantano, the Tanque Verde. I should probably point those out for those who aren't from Tucson, the Rito, the Santa Cruz River, and looking at what was the historic status of those systems, and then what's our potential future status that we could possibly achieve if we were all to work together. So through this network is also how do we engage landowners, so being those, those apartment dwellers even. We have to gain that public support. So we've created this network where you can join, and it's now a communication tool. We can send you messages, we can engage you in potentially becoming a citizen scientist to help us monitor. But it's also to prioritize restoration actions and highlight restoration actions in progress. So what I'm hoping to do is collect information back from everybody who's working in the Tucson Basin. Where are you doing work? What's the progress? How can we highlight that? How we can raise that awareness across the community? So that's where we're trying to go with this. All of this got started from a report that PAG did. This is an update 2012 that really triggered for us, hey, there's potential. There's potential to protect what we currently have and then think about restoring what we have lost. And so we focused on the Sabino and Tanque Verde system in that upper right corner of the basin, partly urban fringe, just at the border of the Coronado National Forest, but supported by a shallow groundwater system, which is where shallow groundwater is within, or has been in the recent time period, within 50 feet of the surface. So it's bioavailable water for the riparian systems. And so we created targeted stream sheds. So these stream sheds aren't watersheds, but more of looking at where is there a hydrologic zone of common characteristics that we can start to then think about moving forward with creating what we call a flow budget, essentially a water budget, looking at inflows, outflows, demands on the system. And so we broke it out partly based on where stream gauges were, partly on where basin alluvial fill, shallow groundwater characteristics were in common. So I'm going to take you through two water budgets. I'm going to focus on the lower Sabino and the middle Tanque Verde and Agua Caliente. But really think about, this is a unique system where we have two major systems coming together, and then we have another major system coming together. So thinking about how can we restore and enhance the resilience of these systems as we move through wet years, dry years, etc. So yeah, the first thing I did is mine the ADWR database back to 1984 to 2015. So these are pumping demands based on those 4 stream sheds. So what's the general trend you see, specifically from year 2000 to forward? Overall, there's a huge decrease in demand. And this is happening nationwide, region-wide. So no surprise there. But okay, so this demand has been decreasing in some of these systems since the 80s. So if the demands are decreasing, why are we not seeing increased stream flows? Why are these systems much more in power? So we have to look beyond just what's happening with the groundwater wells, the demand from the groundwater wells. So this is, I don't want to get into the methodology because Ashley covered that so well. Ours was slightly, fairly similar, some slight differences. I only had annual data to work with. ADWR was very kind in basically providing me a grid-based water budget for 1 mile grid cells across these areas. So I was then able to then aggregate and provide annual water budgets based on their demand, groundwater outflows, recharge value. So this is stream flow recharge, essentially. Mountain front recharge within these areas was very low. So I was mainly accounting for the inflows as coming through what's recharging through the stream system. So the demands are stacked in the bar graphs, and the recharge is the blue line. That's based on stream flow. So going from 1984 to 2015 for lower Sabino stream shed. So this is also aggregating a very diverse system from the top to the bottom. We have about a 4 mile stream reach, but you have very distinct characteristics within that. So again, it's annual, it's aggregating, not the best, but how does this start to provide a communication tool for outreaching to those homeowners? So what do we notice in most years? Is recharge is higher than demand. So I'm thinking to myself, why is this system not flowing year-round? What's going on? I mean, based on this, we should be having surface stream flow. So there's something else going on. So we started with lower Sabino, and then we realized, wait a second, this is a bigger system that's connected to a bigger part of the basin, so we need to start looking at that basin. So as I mentioned, I'm going to focus on Sabino and the Tanque Verde section. So this is this Tanque Verde section where the agua caliente flows into it. Again, stacked demands, so everything from irrigated pasture, which we hand delineated in ArcGIS, riparian forests, which we did the same, pond evaporation, which we did the same, because I started realizing also that the ADWR database doesn't adequately capture, not everybody reports what they truly use, and then there's a lot of exempt wells working in tandem to supply larger uses. So I started realizing we needed to really hand delineate the irrigation and the pond evaporation, pull that out separate, compare it to ADWR's database. If it doesn't match, then we added those values back in. And then we also had the groundwater outflow. So there's a lot of groundwater outflow in this system because it's part of a larger alluvial system. But what do we notice? In most years, recharge is less than demand. So what is that telling us? The system's not in balance, that groundwater levels are dropping for most of those years. Thankfully, we actually, the last 10 years have been fairly bad. In 2015, 2016, I don't have 2016 data yet, there has been a lot of more stream flow, so we're seeing a rebound in those groundwater levels. And Frank in the back has been very helpful for helping corroborate and provide information indicating that. So this map is from Tucson Water, another partner that's been helping. So this is Sabino Creek flowing in to the Tanque Verde, and then the agua caliente coming in. So this is their 15-year groundwater level change from 2000 to 2015. So I just noted the last 10 years have been fairly bad with dry years, less stream flow, so we're seeing less recharge, but our demands stay pretty consistent. So this area is kind of the epicenter of a Kona depression that's forming. So if you notice, this is just down gradient from Sabino Creek. So Sabino Creek, there's actually a lot less demand, and there's fairly high water flows coming through, but this lower section is not recovering. It may, so seasonally, we do have seasonal fluctuations, but it's not persisting through the summer season or the, about this time of year, because my thought is it's getting pulled into this system and then it's flowing downstream. We actually are seeing some recovery in this midsection of the Tanque Verde, but then I believe this map doesn't go further, but further downstream, that also is in decline. So we have to start thinking about this not just from a stream reach perspective, we also have to think in a larger unconfined aquifer, how other impacts are relating to this. So the nice thing is, we just got some funding from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Thank you very much, Doug. I know your funding is getting cut next year, so I figured I'd make use of it this year. To do a habitat restoration project right at the confluence of the Tanque Verde and Agua Caliente wash. Many of you may know Trevor Hare, who is part-time with us and part-time with Borderlands. He's leading a project in coordination with Pima County to do an enhanced stream flow floodplain recharge project. So I kind of jumped the gun on my next slide. I want to save that thought, but I just wanted to point out that area, so basically in the epicenter of that Kona depression. Now interestingly, so we have Sabino Creek groundwater demands, Tanque Verde groundwater demands. So fairly different types of water use. So then we need to tailor our conservation message based on where can savings happen. So irrigated areas, that's not pasture, that's not orchard, that's turf being pumped from groundwater. So huge potential for demand conservation. Metro water users in the hub, 174 gallons per person per day. Huge demand potential reduction. Tucson water is at an average of 90, actually even lower, 80-something gallons per person per day. We move over to the Tanque Verde system. And lakes at Castle Rock has a number of ponds, surface evaporation, pumping groundwater to put into those lakes, basically killing the riparian and vegetation right adjacent to it. So we have huge potential reduction in demand. That's one side of the water budget. The other side of the water budget, and I really like this graphic made by Pima Association of Government, is kind of focusing on shallow groundwater systems. But as we have mountain front recharge to stream flow recharge, okay, great. We slow that flow, we get more of it in the ground, just as these posters, these studies are starting to look at. But we also have the opportunity for rainwater harvesting for putting more water back into the ground. Now that doesn't work everywhere for recharge, so it's going to be very based on soils, based on our earlier presentation where they're not clay lenses, but there's still opportunity there. So this got us thinking, okay, how do we inform landowners what their best practices may be? So we started doing the GIS analysis, looking at where are the highly permeable soils, where are arroyos, so we can start slowing that water down, and where are the less permeable soils, but maybe connected to a groundwater well, so we can offset irrigation. So this is starting to inform our stewardship actions. So we're doing a lot of passive water harvesting, a lot of arroyo one-rock dams to slow that water, potentially get more of it to connect to the aquifer. The project at Isabella Lee along the Tanque Verde and Agua Caliente to take a portion and enhance that recharge in the flood-prone area. So getting more water back into the ground. So that's focusing on the other side of the water budget. So we have supplies and demands that we're enhancing. So these water budgets are starting to inform what's that percentage that we need to reduce demand or enhance recharge. What does that mean in terms of the value? Now we can start to build those trust relationships, see who can do what, and we can start to aggregate those numbers across that landscape. The last piece is, okay, how do we measure progress? Citizen science. So we don't have the funding capacity to do wet-dry mapping, but we can deploy, we're really good at getting lots of volunteers. So basically on a weekly basis, folks are reporting at these locations either flow or groundwater status, feeding it into an online form that then populates an online spreadsheet, now publicly available. So now anybody can see what is the status throughout the Tucson Basin. So it's going to take all of us to do this. So thank you guys very much. Sorry, I used up.
We have time for at least one question. You got to transition the slides.
So when Tucson Water brought CAP water into Avra Valley and started recharging, they started a last on, first off policy for the wells in that Tanque Verde area. And have they been doing that? And I saw there's still Tucson Water pumping on that one graph, although it's decreased.
Yep. So last on, first off policy has been great, but they still turn them on for peak demands. And when do peak demands happen? May, June, July. And so we're still seeing that cost. So CAP has been helpful in helping us recover the basin aquifer, which is ultimately how we achieve hydrologic restoration. But we still need to think about how can we further reduce those peaks. And then we have a lot of non-Tucson water customers, so Metro Hub is fully on groundwater. We have a number of other orchards, pastures, turf irrigation, a few golf courses hit or miss on if they're using groundwater.
So that 26-foot of drawdown since 2000, what percentage of that do you think is due to Tucson water wells versus all the other wells?
And that would be a good question for Frank, who's been measuring. I just put him on the spot.
Yeah, y'all didn't see Frank's like.
But basically,
I just wanted that 26 feet to maximum drawdown looked like it's about 26 feet since 2000, and is more of that from the non-Tucson water wells, or I mean, what part of that do you think is from the non-Tucson water wells?
Well, if it's in the Sabino Creek area,
She's talking
No,
about the
Tanque
middle
Verde.
Tanque
Tanque
the
Verde.
middle Tanque Verde.
Agua Caliente
Yeah,
groundwater conic depression.
that cone depression you had up there on the map,
That
26
could
feet.
be pasture land, I'm not sure. Is that further, that's further down?
So it's basically the epicenter of Isabella Lee. So my thought is it's the last 10 years of drought coupled with continued groundwater pumping for lakes at
Essentially, at the Tanque Verde Agua Caliente confluence.
So we have the lakes at Castle Rock. Trying to think of what else.
Here.
Because I was hoping the groundwater levels were coming up out there because of Tucson water.
So in the last 2 years, these have come up slightly. And that's due to is it a wet year or a dry year? So it's clear that our demands are exceeding our average supply.
49ers is farther up there, isn't it?
Yes, so 49ers, it's this area.
Yeah.
So there's a fault right here that keeps that, keeps this system better intact. And once you hit this fault, it becomes a much deeper system. Thanks. He said one question.
I said one question.